this afternoon. Um, uh, this presentation is on substance use and the adolescent brain. My name is Olivia Livingston, you all know me, and I'm the prevention coordinator at Peer Services. Peer Services is a nonprofit organization based in Evanston that provides substance use prevention and treatment services to youth and adults. Please feel free to use the Q&A box for any questions that you have throughout the presentation. And our speaker, Christine McCall, will go ahead and introduce herself now. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. Okay, let me share my screen. So as Olivia said, I'm Christine McCall. I'm the clinical director of Peer Services. 3 of you know me on this call. So maybe I'll tell a fun fact that you don't know about me, but first and foremost, I am a mom. I'm a mom of an 19-month-old son, Danny, who you may hear banging at the door. His dad took him on a walk right now. So just a heads up, that's what's happening. I've been at Peer for 8.5 years. I graduated from Loyola and have always had an interest in mental health, specifically anxiety disorders and addiction. I remember kind of a story I always share that I think is really kind of, it was meaningful to me in grad school, is one of our professors in one of our addictions class asked, now, you know that everyone in this room, you want to be in the addiction field. You know it's like the lowest paid sector of social services, and it's really hard work. So I'm just wondering what you're doing here. And that's always stuck with me because I really had to take some time to think about what it is about addiction, why I was always drawn to it. I am not in recovery. I don't have anyone personally connected with me that has been in recovery necessarily, but I've always had this strong capacity to empathize with people in addiction. And I really think that for me, the complexity of addiction has always been both fascinating and heartbreaking. And it's also the population that people want to push away, and that they don't, it's too scary because it really seems at sometimes random. And I think a lot of people don't want to face that. So I've really wanted to dedicate part of my career to really understanding the complexity of addiction and how to help people. So that's me. I'd love, since we're in a small group here, and I also know most people here, but I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Liz yet. I'm wondering if we can all share a little bit about ourselves and maybe something we were hoping to get out of this presentation today. So I'm gonna pick on you, Liz, first, since you're the new member of the group.
Yeah, sure. I'm so glad because just it's great what a great opportunity to get to know you guys and just what you do too. So I am a special educator in Evanston, District 65. I was a teacher before I had kids, and then I stayed home with I have 7 kids. And so then I went back into teaching. And while I was home, I was also coaching and just always working in the community, whether just through the PTA and just through the schools. And just always care about kids and outcomes and want to be involved in any way I can. And so I also coach volleyball at the high school for boys and girls. And then I am also one of the co-founders of Girls Play Sports. And so I help run that program. And then actually, am involved in the programming of Girls Play Sports. So
that's amazing. Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I actually, one of my kids is he smokes pot like all the time. And we've just really had a difficult time because of that. And I think what you guys are doing for offering these discussions is fantastic. And I pushed it out to so many people I'm sad that there's not people here today, because I think this information and discussions about this is so, so important. Because just, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
I know my kids sat me down this summer to talk to me about my approach, and how it just was not an effective approach to getting them to do what I needed them to do. And so I've learned a lot during the pandemic, and I'm trying to get with the program and see new strategies, find out new strategies. So anyway, that's really why I'm here, and because I work with kids and I just want to learn. So
That's awesome. Thanks, Liz. And thanks so much for that personal share.
yeah.
And we will be pushing this out more. So I love talking about this stuff. So I'll just keep, the good thing about COVID is that it's allowed us to present in so many different ways and platforms. So we'll keep pushing our information out there. Thank you. Luana, tell us about yourself.
All right, hi, I'm Luana. I've been part of Peer Services MAT team for almost 2 years. March 18th will be 2 years exactly. I am here because frankly, I'm presenting next week, and I don't get to see Christine present that often. So I thought I would watch her, observe, and like steal some of what she does to make my own presentation better. And most of I've been in the field I've been in social work for what feels like a very long time, 13 years. But I really don't have much of like an infinitesimal amount of experience with adolescents. I find them kind of fascinating and kind of scary at the same time. So this was also an opportunity for me to just to expand my own knowledge base.
Awesome. Thanks, Luana. I agree. The scary and fascinating. I share similar feelings, but understanding that Danny will be an adolescent someday, it's really pushed me to understand them more. Okay. All right, Gina. Hello.
Hello. So I'm a prevention specialist at Peer Services, but yeah, I love hearing Christine talk. I always learn new things, no matter who's presenting. I've heard all of us at Peer. Every time Erin speaks, I see her speak often, and I learn something new every time. So I'm excited for that. I've been at Peer for 2.5 years, and I'm currently getting my PEL, so I'm going to be a school social worker, hopefully by the end of this school year. So it's been interesting dealing with the teens and the high schoolers in the school system. I probably couldn't name any of them if I saw their faces. They're always got their cameras off. So it's definitely a difficult time, but yeah, the adolescent brain, and I don't know, I just find it so interesting, and I love talking with them and connecting with them, and they're just great.
Awesome. Thanks, Gina. Okay, and then we met Olivia, so I think we can start. I'm going to just be mindful of my watch because I tend to ramble and want to get to the content. So, objectives. So, also in my introduction, I forgot to mention, I am not a neurologist. I am a licensed clinical social worker. So I did my very best at researching the brain and explaining the brain, but please don't hold me accountable for absolutely everything I say. So just like to put that out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about addiction and brain function. I think it's important before we start talking about what the differences between adolescent and adult brain is, that we understand what the key players are with addiction in the brain in general. We're going to move on to talk about then some of the differences between the adolescent and adult brain and why it really matters pertaining to addiction and risk factors. We'll talk about some national kind of trends that we're seeing in adolescent substance use and mental health, and then kind of from my own experience at Peer, what we're seeing kind of happening in Evanston right now. And then I wanted to wrap up with some hopeful and positive discussion about how we can promote brain healing with ourselves and with adolescents who may have struggled with some substance use. And I believe Olivia put them, people can add questions in the chat box or the question box, right? Okay, great. So if you have questions, put them up there and I'll carve out some time that we can talk at the end. Okay, so addiction and brain function. Let's get into it. All right, so obviously it's a lot more complicated than what's on the screen now, but there are some key players in the brain that are really important when we talk about addiction and why it's so powerful. So first and foremost, I think most of us are aware of dopamine and how powerful it is. That's the neurotransmitter that is activated from rewards or pleasure. So these are the feel-good hormones. Dopamine is a great thing. It's not a bad thing. We all have it. We all need it. We all use it. But it's one of the most important things when we talk about addiction and how substances affect our brain. Next is glutamate. And so this is the most abundant neurotransmitter in the brain. So dopamine and glutamate interact to take over the reward learning system. So essentially it gives kind of a channel to flood the brain more with the positive feel-good hormones. We have a nucleus accumbens, which is the primary site mediating reward behavior. And this is theorized to be directly involved in reinforcing addictive brain behaviors. The prefrontal cortex, this is the good part of our brain. This is where our responsibility lies, where we make good decisions for ourselves with executing tasks and judgment. And it's important to know, and I'll get into this later, that this is part of the brain that matures later by the end of our kind of brain development. And so that's really key in understanding why addiction and why adolescents pose, like, there are risk factors with addiction. And we'll get into that later when we talk about adolescence. And then finally, the other kind of key player is the hippocampus and amygdala. And this is where our brain stores learning and memory. And so that's a good thing. We need it. But it also stores, when we talk about addiction, information and environmental cues. So for instance, if you went to, you associated, let's say, wine with an activity that you did. So that in your brain now is going to associate it together. So now when you do that activity and you don't have the wine, you're going to be like, huh, something's missing here. Like, I need the buddy to go with it. And so that's why they stick together. That's why it's really important with addiction. All right, so I don't think there's any neurologists in the room. I'm really happy because they'd probably be raising their hand being like, okay, stop talking, let me take over. All right. So this is we're going to transition to talking about dopamine. This is, and I can send, Olivia can send the slides out if you guys are interested. This is an excellent YouTube video. Dr. Corey Waller is specialist in addiction, and he has a theory about survival and dopamine. So this YouTube video is about 22 minutes long, and it's a really accessible video that really talks about how important dopamine is in survival and how it impacts addiction. So I'll break it down in what his main points are, but if you guys are interested in learning more, please go to this website, the link. So Dr. Waller says that there are three things we need for survival. We all know we need food, we all need water, and we need dopamine. And we need dopamine because it's the chemical responsible for motivation and reward. And so we need motivation to get out of bed, to go to work, to earn money, to eat, to have a home. It's very important. And that's why he is theorizing that it's just as important as food and water for survival. So what is normal dopamine? What does it look like? How is it important? And so on a normal day, and this is a day, you know, you got up, everything worked out well at work. Maybe you had something good for lunch, had a good conversation, like it was a good day. Not great, good. Our brains produce for a normal day about 50 nanograms per deciliter of dopamine. And so this is just our basic kind of functional day. When we have a bad day, if we had a breakup, we had a bad conversation with our boss, or it just didn't feel right, our dopamine drops down to around 40 nanograms. Our best day ever, thinking that I don't know, let's just fantasize for a moment. We're in the Caribbean and we had just an amazingly relaxing day with our partner, friend, whomever. I'm like, my husband and I actually did go to St. Thomas, and this is where I had the best mahi-mahi sandwich of my life. And this is the place I always go to. So on that day, you're at about 100 nanograms. Interesting enough, your favorite food can get you to 94 nanograms per deciliter. So there is a thing when you go through a bad day or bad breakup and you go get a pint of ice cream or whatever it is, like there's actual science to support it. So treat yourself. So it's important to know that all of these levels, these are all normal, they're natural, it happens to all of us. It's also important to know that the brain is not naturally meant to go above these levels. We don't have any mechanisms to readjust itself. So how do substances affect dopamine? How does that come into play? So methamphetamines, which we know is a stimulant, which is, it's an upper, that can increase your dopamine to over 1,100 nanograms. That is 10 times the max normal level. Marijuana and alcohol, heroin can push you into the high 100s. So you could be thinking, well, what's the problem? I mean, why would we not want to take something that's going to make us feel great all the time? And I guess that does make sense. But the problem is that our brains, like I said before, we can't handle that level of dopamine. So it has to recalibrate itself lower to survive. And so now, so your brain doesn't understand why all of a sudden you're having these huge floods of dopamine. So it recalibrates so that it can bring it down so it can be normalized again. The problem is that as a protective measure, it's going to go way down because it doesn't know when it's going to go way up again, which means that now your best day is down to 10 nanograms per deciliter. So if we go to the slide before, we know that worst day was at 40 nanograms. So now, after you've been using drugs or alcohol for a long time and your brain is adapted to this new dopamine rush, it recalibrates to a very low level of dopamine. And this is so important because and this is why we see people, particularly with like methamphetamine or cocaine withdrawal, they crash, they plummet, they can't get out of bed. It's the body really trying to adjust itself. And so this is really important, and why I stress that when we think about, judgment and bias, we hear about, well, why can't they just stop? It doesn't make any sense. And they can't stop because people's brain is associating that drug with survival, because the brain knows that in order to get normal dopamine, I have to take that drug. And so this is the cycle of addiction, and this is why it's so complicated. And this is just the brain portion of it. We have to also talk about trauma, and we talk about anxiety and depression, conflict with family, relationships. So I just wanted, and I know all of us on the call are pro recovery and not wanting to place stigma on addiction, but I do like to stress this with people because I think that from the outside, when we see clients that continue to go back despite losing family, friends, everything, it's kind of crazy making. It's hard to understand until we kind of really look at the actual physiological piece of it. Okay, so we're gonna, now that we kind of have a framework of how the brain and addiction interact, let's talk about the adolescent brain and the differences and why it matters. So if we look at this, everyone loves like the light up brain images, but what this shows is that the purple part of the brain is the more mature and the yellow red is less mature. We all know a 5-year-old it does not have a mature brain. It does not understand rational behavior. But if we go even to a 20-year-old, there are still parts of the brain that still has not matured. And that part of the brain tends to be in that prefrontal cortex, which is that judgment, responsible decision-making part of the brain. So let's talk more about that. So this is kind of a side. It was an interesting thing as I was doing some brain research that there is this, it's called the ABCD study. It's the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, started in 2015. So this is a massive study in the US that takes a look at brain development in children. And they're taking a look at how different things such as sports, video games, social media, sleep patterns, smoking affect brain development. And because of the length of the study and the depth of it, it's going to take several years before we get some actual data of how these things affected the teen brain. But I'm really excited to kind of see what the data shows us and tells us about how the brain changes, particularly with social media, because we know this has been, the newest phenomenon. I mean, I certainly didn't have to deal with social media, thank God. And I'm hoping that it gets shut down before Danny gets to be an adolescent, so I don't have to deal with them either. But at any rate, it was really interesting. There's a lot to dissect in there. So if you're interested in research or anything along that, check it out. All right, so going back to the adolescent brain development. So the brain, we know, develops, and I think there's even research suggesting that it continues developing after 25, but for the most part, the brain is developing from ages 13, well, up to 25 years old. Like that's when we kind of have the brain that we have as an adult for the most part. So the ages 13 to 25 is a crucial time of our brain where we're pruning and strengthening neuron connections. And this means that, the healthy activities we're doing, like music, sports, they're all promoting healthy connections and responses and relationships within the brain. So for instance, if, we have a wide social network and we're getting a lot of comfort and support from friends, our brain is understanding like, oh, when I need support, this is what I can do to get it, right? And it's strengthening that. But we also have the maladaptive coping activities, drugs and alcohol. And so the brain is also learning, oh, I had a bad day. This drink really helped me. And so this is why it's so important during this age to really advocate and strengthen the healthy activities versus the maladaptive activities. I have she's now 18-year-old niece, and she's such a good kid, maybe even too good. I don't think she's even like branched. I think she should branch a little bit, but I tell her, Madeline, like, if you can just get as old as possible before you try alcohol or any other drug, like the better. Like, let your brain kind of really give your brain the best shot. And then after it's like mostly developed, then if you want to, it'll be there for you. But I joke around it, but it really, seriously, if the longer teens can hold off from using, the better the outcomes are. And the statistics between the using at a young age and the potential for addiction really is quite outstanding. And we're looking at adolescents. We know the brain is learning, growing, strengthening. We also know that there's a lot of other things happening with adolescents. We have our identity versus role confusion. adolescents are constantly pushing the envelope, and they're doing this because it's normal, and they're doing it because they're trying to learn who they are in the world and what their place is in the world. So experimentation, pushing boundaries, exploring, that's all normal and good. But then we also have hormonal shifts and we have peer influences. So all of this, to be said, is like the perfect storm for addiction potential. Not to, I mean, I'm scaring myself right now because I think I'm the only one on this call that, has a kid that will grow up to be in this vortex. But really, I mean, like, it's an exciting time. It's a time for exploration, but it's also a time that we really have to be cognizant of everything that they're going through and all of the potential and risk. Okay. So we do have, so this is I'm just gonna check the time. I think we have time for this. This is it's like 8 minutes. It's a great video. So Dr. Dan Siegel, he's kind of the expert in adolescent brain development. His work is a little dry, but it's really good. So if you guys are interested in more of that, but I'm gonna show it because I think we've got time and I think it's helpful and positive. So Olivia, let me know if you can hear this. Let's see.
Adolescent period is absolutely amazing. People often give it a negative approach, saying, oh, it's a time where adolescents are going to lose their mind, or they're just immature, or raging hormones drive them crazy. These are all not only wrong, but they're myths that mislead us and actually disempower us. Whether we're adults or adolescents, they actually give us the wrong message and they make it so there's nothing we can do. So what is actually the truth? The truth is that instead of raging hormones, what's happening is we have remodeling in the brain. In ways we never could have predicted, we now understand two big things are happening in the brain. Things you as an adult can support adolescents in developing well, and if you're an adolescent, you actually can use this to help your brain grow in an optimal way. What are those two things? The brain is pruning itself. So imagine that in childhood, you're growing like a tree and establishing all these branches and all these leaves are growing. In the brain, that means connections among the basic cell, the neuron, called synapses, are being established. And you're soaking in the knowledge of the world, and that's beautiful. The tree is just growing, growing, growing. But then what happens that surprised everyone is the brain begins to prune itself. You start carving away some of those leaves, some of the smaller branches, even some of the larger branches. And the reason for the pruning is to specialize the brain. While the child is developing in ways that are really generalized, learning everything they can about everything they can, an adolescent is going to begin to find their passion, to actually find things they like, things they really love doing, and to drive their development in that way. So pruning is actually a use it or lose it principle underneath it. That if you don't use something, you're going to lose it. So if you like sports or like dancing or like music, do those things so you continue to establish those circuits. The second thing that happens in the remodeling adolescent brain is myelin formation. Myelin is a healthy sheath that allows connected neurons to communicate with each other in a much more effective way. How? It's 100 times faster, the signal that's sent down a neuron to communicate with another neuron, 100 times faster, and after it fires off, it's 30 times shorter the resting period that happens. 30 times 100 is 3,000. So when you've put down myelin, you've made your neurons communicate 3,000 times more effectively. That's a great thing. Now, the great thing, too, is that you as an adolescent can actually use the focus of your attention to be aware of your emotions, aware of other people, to be engaging in activities, to be doing things with your thoughts that actually reinforce the parts of your brain you want to hold on to. So the good news about the remodeling story is that a field called neuroplasticity, how the brain responds to experience, shows us that what you do with your mind can change the activity and therefore the structure of your brain. So if you then come up with the statement that the ultimate goal of brain remodeling is to make an integrated brain, to differentiate areas, that's the pruning, and myelinate them, that's the linkage. When you increase differentiation and linkage, you make the brain more integrated. And an integrated brain is the pathway toward well-being. And you can do mind-sight exercises. These are exercises that increase insight, empathy, and integration. And if you do them as an adolescent, and you can also do them as an adult, you'll actually increase the integration of your brain as your brain is growing, not just during adolescence, but throughout the lifespan. And what's the outcome of integration? When integration is made visible, it's kindness and compassion. And so what we see through adolescent development is that our relationships become built on connections that are deep and filled with honoring each other's vulnerability, that's kindness, and supporting connections that are compassionate, filled with a sense of caring about other people and wanting to help them. This is the kind of world we can build as we move through life and support each other in our development.
Okay, he's got a bunch of stuff on YouTube if you're interested to learn more, but I thought that was a really kind of hopeful and positive video about, it's not all gloom and doom either, right? We have the adolescent time is exciting, and there are so many potentials and opportunities. Okay. So I'm going to move on to talking about the adolescent trends in substance use. I took a lot of this data from the YRBS behavioral survey in 2019. And then I'm going to also, after I talk about kind of what I'm just seeing working with adolescents in Evanston right now. Okay. And this, I think the study is, I think it was 10, it's all across the US, and I think the total sample size was 10,000 students. And so what they're seeing, so the age of first use of alcohol, 15% of high school students had their first drink before 13. And this kind of breaks down the race, and yeah, interesting. Current use, and they defined the current use was at least one drink of alcohol during the last 30 days. And so this, again, we're seeing 29.2% of high school students report currently drinking. And this is, it's about stayed the same for the past couple of years, but it's actually also decreasing. At the highest, it was about half of high school students in 1995. So that's actually pretty encouraging. I was actually, when I looked at the data, I was actually surprised and encouraged by some of the numbers I was seeing. Marijuana. So try marijuana before 13 years of age, about 5.6% of students. And this number has pretty much kind of just plateaued and stayed the same since 91. Same with who currently uses marijuana. And I think they define marijuana in the same way as alcohol. If you currently use, if you use marijuana anytime in the previous 30 days. So about 21.7% of high school students report that they currently use marijuana monthly. Okay. Now here's the hot topic, and this is the one that we've actually seen a big increase, vaping. So tobacco vaping products, we've seen a huge increase from 2017 to 2019, from 13% to almost 33%. This one still perplexes me because I don't remember when it was, but I remember when e-cigarettes started and how they were actually kind of, they weren't cool, right? If someone was like using their e-cigarette, it was like, oh, wow, that's pretty lame. I mean, I didn't say that, but that was the perception. And then I remember one day, it was like, I think it was 3 years ago when I was, I think in Wicker Park, and I saw just 20 somethings with their vape pens just smoking out. And I'm like, when did that become cool? Like so vaping now is like what cigarettes were earlier on, right? Like it does become problematic, and people definitely have addiction to it, and it has some consequences, but it's also this kind of coolness factor in high school of people that are using it. So that vaping's a whole other thing that's pretty complicated, but this was the one of the only drugs that had such a sharp spike up. Most of the other ones were kind of plateaued or even decreased a little bit. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about trends in mental health. This was a staggering statistic that I found, that 1 in 6 children aged 2 to 8 years old has a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. So that was a pretty staggering statistic for me. And just to kind of break down how they defined mental, behavioral, or developmental, what those mean. So mental would be anxiety, depression, those type of disorders. Behavioral, we're looking at the conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. So if you're not a clinician, it's, problematic kids that are getting in trouble, more so than what a normal kid would get in trouble about. And then developmental, our autistic disorders, our ADHD disorders. And when we look specifically at the breakdown, just look at the anxiety spike in 12 to 17 years of age. I'm not surprised, I will go into the trends that I see, but there's something about seeing it on the graph that was pretty shocking to me. And so definitely, the behavior disorders seem to kind of plummet or rebalance. But definitely as we get older, our rates of depression, anxiety do increase, according to the survey. So before I get to that slide, I'll talk about what I'm seeing in Evanston and working with students. I would say the past 5 years, the 3 drugs that we're seeing all the time, almost exclusively with our teens: marijuana, alcohol, and then vaping products. Marijuana seems to be a really big problem. And but what is also kind of interesting that I've noticed over the years of working at Peer is that more adolescents are self-reporting a problem with marijuana. And so I actually find this really encouraging, because they're coming to Peer, or they're identifying like, yeah, I am smoking every day and this isn't good. And I actually think I have a problem and want help on it. So I think that's really encouraging, that while the use is prevalent and it's increasing, there's also enough, something's happening where there's enough information, enough guidance out there that teens are recognizing that it's not just a harmless drug. I'm also seeing a lot of, particularly this past year, the kids that we are seeing are really struggling. They're really depressed, they're really anxious, they're not getting out of bed, they're smoking pot, they're not logging in. I can't imagine being in high school where like the most important things are connection and friends and activities, and you can't do any of them. Who wants to sit at home with their parents all day? Nobody. So our kids are struggling. They really are. And my fear and my assumption is that even if we get back to school, hopefully next year, the long-term real secondary consequences of this pandemic are going to last with us for a while. So we really have to be aware of what's happening, and we have to be prepared to help our kids get through this, because it's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. And there's nothing more that aggravated me. I think it was last year when I saw a meme on Facebook that said, our grandparents fought, your grandparents fought in World War II. We're just asking you to stay home and watch Netflix. It's not that hard. And I just went off on anyone who could listen, because I'm like, you don't understand. You're not in that mindset. You're not in that such important developmental stage. It is hard. And we have to acknowledge that. So what does this data tell us? While the data doesn't show a huge increase, except for vaping, we still know that, what it was, that 29% of students report drinking. And so we still know, even though we haven't seen huge fluctuations, it's still very prevalent. Kids are still drinking, they're using, it's in the schools. Some of them are using them experimentally and it will be fine. They will move on, they'll mature, but some won't. And it's hard to tell which group people will fall into. Anxiety and depressive disorders are on the increase. There's a lot more to be worried about, a lot more pressures than I think, or they're different than they used to be. We saw that the rates of teens that are using before age 13, so teens are experimenting early. What this is telling us as parents, as educators, as helpers, is that we need to have early conversations about substance use and mental health and adaptive coping. I think that, and I know probably everyone on this call has run into this issue where there is resistance with parents or schools, community, to talk to kids early on about substance use, like, oh, the 10-year-old's too young. And I probably would think that too if I didn't have this background information. But because kids are using early, and because it's so crucial, or alcohol and drugs impact the brain development so much, it's really important that we're having age-appropriate conversations with teens and kids. They're called tweens, I think, still, right? Okay. All right, so it's not all gloom and doom. I promise. The good thing about the human body is the liver and the brain are incredibly resilient organs. It's outstanding. I worked with people that their liver enzymes were through the roof from drinking, and 3 weeks of sobriety completely healed. They had normal functions again. And so it's incredible. And I think it's so encouraging, and it's important to remind ourselves and people that we work with about this, so that there is hope. Because I think if we don't have hope, then there's no recovery. So there's some other things that I want to talk about with brain healing, about how we can, if we've had kids or students or even ourselves or adults that we've used more than intended to, there are some real ways in which we can really promote brain healing. So I'm going to talk about those. And I think the first thing I get when I talk about this is like, well, we should just do Sudoku all the time and puzzles, right? That's what heals the brain. And like, sure, it helps. Yeah, that's great. But the brain is an integrated organ, and we need to have integrated practices for a healthy brain. So particularly with parents and with teens, I kind of wanted to focus on that. Providing boundaries and structure. It's so important. Everyone knows this, everyone talks about it, but in practice, it's hard to do. It's, my son likes to do this thing, throw his stuffed animal and his Nooks out of the crib. And he knows mom will go in and get them and bring it back to him. And I do. And I know that, like, I got to put that boundary in place, because he's learning that he can just do what he wants and I'll fix it for him. But I'll get to that another day. Let your adolescent take health risks, healthy risks. I'm not supposed to say health risks, healthy risks. So we know that experimentation and branching out, learning from your mistakes is really important. And for a parent to be present with them after they make a mistake and talk with them about what happened and what they learned is so important and so hard. It's such a hard thing to do, and like be objective as a parent. But not to be afraid to let teens take the risks. So they're going to, whether you let them or not. Stay connected and present. Again, as a parent, as a helper, as a professional, as a social worker, it's one of the most important things and one of the hardest things, like being present every single day and being attuned, is a really important skill, and it takes practice. So, give yourself credit if you fall off the attunement, bandwagon, and get back on. Offer positive reinforcement and frequent praise. So my mother-in-law is staying with us right now, and she is notorious for giving my husband just like positive reinforcement all the time, always has, and he has the strongest ego, and it's kind of annoying sometimes because he'll make eggs and she'll go on and on. Oh my gosh, John, these eggs, they're just the best thing I ever had. And I'm like, they're just eggs, it's fine. It really is. Those like continued positive reinforcement, it goes a long way. Helping your teen gets lots of sleep. This is a thing that I think there is a lot of conflict about. Parents are complaining, why are you sleeping all the day? Like, you need to get up, you need to do things. And yes, it's important to distinguish what's sleep and what's depression. But particularly if you have a child who is coming maybe off of substance use or dealing with something really hard, they're going to want and need to sleep more than usual, because that's one of the most important ways that the brain can heal itself. And finally, support your own self-care, because all this is really hard. It's hard to be present. It's hard to be attuned. It's hard to set boundaries. So give yourself a break, talk about it, get support to get back there. All right. So should any of you want these resources, there's a couple of them I wanted to offer that I think are really, and to share with people who may be struggling with their teens. There is this, it's called parentingwisely.com. I think you have to pay for membership, but you might be able to get like a free month or so. But it's a really useful tool. It's an interactive parenting program and website. It offers a community forum, so you've got community of parents for support. It also offers videos and practice scenarios around tough conversations. So it'll give you like like if you chose like the scenario, my teen is smoking pot. I don't know how to talk to them about it. It'll give you different vignettes of different ways you can handle it, and it'll talk through like which ones are, better to use and more effective. So it's cool. I think it's a really great resource. Of course, some of the video scenarios are a little like after school specially. So like no one's winning the academies here for them, but the content's really good. One of my favorite books, and I think, this is good for a parent. It's also good just like as humans. It's called Parenting with Presence by Susan Stifelman. And she talks about like how we parent. It's about using that attunement and then also bringing some reflection within ourselves. So when our child does this, when we get mad at our child doing something, why are we really getting mad? We need to kind of draw within ourselves of what it reminds us about ourselves, and to kind of find resolution to then get back to how we help our team. So if you guys know of parents who are looking for a resource, who may have time for it, probably not, but it's really good, and it's short chapters that are easy digestible that you can just pick up and read a few pages here and there. And finally, our next webinar. So I kind of set up the back end of it, of like why it matters, what's different. And on March 19th, I hope to have a more interactive conversation about talking to teens about tough stuff. So have actual real scenarios and opportunities to kind of learn and practice how we navigate these really hard topics in a really complicated world right now. Yeah. Okay. Well, 4:57. I can't believe I hit it right on the spot. So I know we just have a few minutes if anyone had any last minute questions.
Thank you so much, Christine. And just heads up, I know on her slide, she had March 19th as the next webinar that she'll be hosting. We might tweak it a little bit with the time. It may be somewhere around noon, but we'll be putting that out through flyers and whatnot in the coming weeks. But I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Those of you that could not make it, if you're watching this after the fact, we hope that you'll join us at our next webinar that'll be on February 26th. Okay, and the topic is going to be teen dating violence, what parents think they know. Okay, and I just also want to say, I just want to remind you that Peer Services provides outpatient alcohol and drug treatment for teenagers and adults, including early intervention support for teenagers who may be experiencing some form of substance use challenge. So please feel free to contact us and reach out with any concerns, and we'll be here to help you. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.